From broadsides to the line of battle, how cannons rewrote the sea. A cold morning in the English Channel, 1666. The mist still clings to the sails as the colossal hull of the Royal Prince slowly turns to port. 100 gun ports align. 1,000 pounds of iron await the order to fire. A second of silence, and the sea erupts in thunder. The combined weight of the broadside equals dumping an entire carriage of molten iron onto the enemy. It is the sound of modernity arriving at the ocean. Before this era, the sea was a field of chaos. Ships rammed like floating fortresses, sailors wielded swords, and the fate of a battle depended on the wind and courage. But in the 17th century, something changes. The sea learns geometry. Captains begin to draw lines, calculate angles, measure cadences. For the first time, victory depends less on bravery and more on precision. The invention is not a new weapon, but a new way to use them, the disciplined broadside. Firing no longer by instinct, but by sequence, in line. It is the birth of a grammar, the line of battle, where each cannon speaks in the exact cadence of a naval clock. The sound echoing through the channel is not just gunpowder, it is command, calculation, and revolution. From there on, empires will measure themselves not by their sails, but by the weight of their fire edge. The story that begins with this broadside changes everything. It turns ships into floating batteries, the sea into a chessboard, and men into pieces of an equation of steel and discipline. During the 17th century, the sea waged a silent war between two doctrines. On one side, the chaos inherited from the 16th century. Ships seeking direct collision, grappling hooks, and hand-to-hand combat. Each captain was an isolated hero, and battle a confusion of smoke and courage. On the other side, a new idea emerged, the discipline of fire. The sea, for the first time, became a field of calculation. What separated these eras was not just technology, but mindset. The Doctrine A of galleons and privateers believed in proximity. Victory meant boarding and dominating. In contrast, Doctrine B, born in the Dutch and English navies, bet on distance, aligning ships, concentrating firepower, and destroying the enemy from afar. It was the transition from combat as duel to combat as system. A well-trained ship could fire a broadside every 90 to 120 seconds. 100 coordinated cannons turned that cadence into a wall of iron and fire. Precision no longer depended on luck, but on the crew's training, which followed an almost choreographed ritual. Run out, aim, fire, sponge, reload. A mistake in seconds could cost the entire ship. This discipline changed the logic of naval power. What was once a collection of independent vessels became a collective machine, synchronized by signal flags and hourglasses. The line of battle was born as a floating factory of destruction, capable of converting gunpowder and steel into maritime supremacy. From this clash of doctrines, the sea would never be the same. Isolated bravery gave way to the science of obedience and cadence. The ocean gained its lines, and with them, a new form of war. Before the line of battle dominated the sea, the fleets of the early 17th century faced a brutal problem. The technology itself had not yet caught up to the ambition. Cannons were powerful but imprecise, and ships too fragile to withstand the coordinated recoil of dozens of pieces firing at once. Each broadside was an act of faith. Wooden gun carriages, carts on short wheels, absorbed the impact with violence. The recoil pushed the piece almost to the center of the deck, requiring 8 to 12 sailors to wrestle with the weight of a ton, to reposition and reload. Firing used linstock matches, lit by hand amid wind and smoke. The delay between ignition and impact could ruin the aim. For this reason, naval artillery was still by hull. The gunner aimed at the enemy's body and prayed that luck would correct the rest. Effective range rarely exceeded 200 to 400 meters. Beyond that, dispersion turned any shot into a lottery. Many projectiles plunged into the sea before hitting the target, and combat reduced to an exchange of flashes and thunder without decisive effect. Not surprisingly, chronicles from 1620 to 1650 describe entire battles with few losses. The destruction came more from fire or surrender than from shots. This was the valley of weakness between the old and the new, the period when the idea of the line already existed, but the technique did not yet sustain it. Reliable flintlocks, standardized calibers, and reinforced hulls were lacking. The sea was ready for discipline, but the gunpowder did not yet respond with precision. The 17th century would thus be a long race between human ingenuity and the limits of wood and iron. Between 1600 and 1805, naval warfare ceased to be an art of improvisation and became applied engineering. This transformation did not happen overnight. It was a sequence of discrete innovations that, added together, changed everything. First milestone: the four-wheeled carriage and pulley system. See 1600 to 1620. Before, the recoil of a cannon could tear up the deck. Now, cables and pulleys allowed control of the movement and repositioning of the piece in seconds. The crew stopped fighting against the cannon and began working with it. Second, the replacement of the match by the naval flintlock, a flint trigger that eliminated the delay between ignition and firing. Introduced gradually in the English Navy at the end of the 17th century, this innovation increased precision and safety, allowing synchronized broadsides. Third, the birth of the line-ahead doctrine, the single-file formation, recorded in Dutch and English manuals around 1650. Each ship followed the smoke trail of the one ahead, maintaining the same course and distance. Thus, the entire artillery could fire from one side without blocking the neighbor's fire. Fourth, the theorists of tactics, Paul Hoste in France, 1697, and Charles Deane in England, turned practice into science. Their treatises systematized angles, signals, and standardized orders, creating a common language for entire fleets. Fifth, the consolidation of the 74-gun ship, the standard ship of the line in the 18th century. With more than 50% of its pieces heavy 24 to 32-pounders, it was the perfect balance between firepower and maneuverability. In just over a century, the ocean went from improvisation to serial production of tactics and discipline. The line of battle finally had body, doctrine, and artillery to sustain the myth. June 1666. The English Channel boils under a curtain of smoke. For the first time in history, two entire fleets, English and Dutch, fight while maintaining line formations. It is the definitive test of the new doctrine. For 4 consecutive days, about 160 ships exchanged nearly uninterrupted fire. The battle stretches over more than 90 hours, with tens of thousands of shots fired. No sailing naval conflict would be so long and disciplined. Admiral Michiel de Ruyter, the veteran Dutchman, understands that the secret is no longer in boarding, but in preserving the line. With each maneuver, he orders calculated firing angles, avoiding the collapse of the formation. On the other side, George Monk and Prince Rupert try to maintain cohesion under uncertain winds. The smoke makes the air invisible. Flags and signal shots are the only possible language. The losses are colossal. More than 20 ships sunk or captured, thousands dead and wounded. But what truly is born there is a grammar of fire. Each coordinated broadside proves that a disciplined line can concentrate destructive energy like never before. Engravings of the time show rows of ships spewing fire simultaneously, a spectacle of symmetry and violence. For the first time, the two greatest maritime powers realized that order surpasses bravery. Reiter's partial victory is less important than the tactical lesson. Whoever masters the line will master the sea. The 4 days battle becomes the laboratory of naval modernity. From then on, every confrontation, from Solebay to Trafalgar, will echo the same truth revealed in 1666. The line of battle was not just a formation, but a revolution in the very idea of power. The term line of fire defines the tactical revolution that turned the sea into a field of geometry. The idea was simple and devastating. Align ships in a single file, line ahead, so that each could use its entire broadside without interfering with the neighbor's shots. Concentrated power came not from individual size, but from collective synchronization. Instead of plunging into the chaos of melees, the commander now thought in angles and cadence. The ideal was to maneuver to cross the enemy's route, the famous crossing the T maneuver, where the ship crossing the front of the enemy line could discharge its entire broadside while the enemy could only respond with bow guns. In seconds, the advantage became absolute. Hoste and Dion's manuals detailed 3 commandments. 1. Maintain the line's distance and course. 2. Concentrate fire on the same target until dismasting it. 3. Do not break formation under any circumstances except by direct order. This absolute obedience ensured the flow of fire, each cannon becoming part of a war clock. Effectiveness came from angular precision. The ideal broadside hit the enemy between 60 and 90 degrees, maximizing penetration and transverse impact. A well-trained line could maintain that cadence for hours, producing a floating wall of iron. Thus, naval combat ceased to be a duel of captains and became command engineering, where flags, signals, and discipline replaced individual heroism. From the line of fire, every battle became an equation solved under wind, smoke, and steel, the first truly industrialized military system at sea. Summer of 1690. The English Channel witnesses one of the most precise demonstrations of the new naval doctrine, the Battle of Beachy Head, or Bévisier, as the French call it. On one side, the Franco-Jacobite navy, commanded by Anne-Hilarion de Tourville, a veteran and direct disciple of Paul Oste's theories. On the other, the numerically superior but disorganized anglo-Dutch fleet. The result would be a lesson on the value of order at sea. Tourville knew that his fleet's strength lay in discipline. His 70 vessels maintained impeccable formation, each ship at a constant distance, firing in sequence without breaking the line. The Allies, in contrast, fought under unfavorable winds, and their flag communications failed repeatedly. In a few hours, the difference between doctrine and improvisation became fatal. Contemporary sources report that French losses were 3 times lower than the enemy's, an impressive ratio for the time. 3 Allied ships were destroyed and several severely damaged, forcing a disorganized retreat to the Thames. Tourville, faithful to the principle of the line, maintained control until the last shot. Beachy Head proved that Oste's tactic was not armchair theory, it was an operational language. Alignment, coordinated fire, and obedience to formation turned combat into pure mechanical efficiency. For France, the episode marked the height of its tactical supremacy under Louis XIV. For England, it was a shock,
a defeat that would inspire profound reforms in the Royal Navy, focused on signaling, training, and standardization of orders. Beachy Head was not just a battle won by Tourville, it was the definitive manifesto of the line of battle, where geometry triumphed over improvised heroism. The success of the line of battle depended on one simple thing: synchrony. 100 cannons only formed a broadside if they all fired almost simultaneously, and for much of the 17th century, that was impossible. The linstock match, used since Iberian galleons, had unpredictable delay. Damp air, wind, or even fear could delay the shot by seconds, and at sea, seconds decide who lives. The revolution came with the naval flintlock, or seaman's flintlock. Adopted systematically by the Royal Navy from the 1740s onward, this small piece of steel and flint replaced the match with a mechanical trigger. An instantaneous spark, generated by the clash of steel against stone, ignited the priming charge and fired the cannon with almost chronometric precision. The impact was profound. The failure rate dropped from about 30% to less than 10%, according to British reports of the time. With this, commanders could order full broadsides, achieving the visual and moral shock effect that defined 18th century naval warfare. For the first time, batteries could breathe together. The flintlock also reduced accidents, no more matches falling on powder or burned sailors. The result was more cadence, more safety, and more confidence. Crews began training the firing as a choreography: run out, aim, fire, sponge, reload. With the flintlock, the ship of the line truly became a collective weapon, capable of translating the commander's calculation into instantaneous fire. The sea, which before responded with delay and luck, now obeyed the dry touch of a spark. Engineering had finally given form to discipline, and the line of battle gained its own voice. The 17th century saw the ship transform before the eyes of the sailors themselves. What was once a mobile fortress for boardings and hand-to-hand combat gradually became a battery on the sea. This change redefined every inch of the hull, every crew function, and even the logic of naval warfare itself. In old galleons, the cannon was just one resource. In a ship of the line, it was the center of everything. The main deck became designed as a continuous line of fire, with gun ports spaced to ensure perfect angles. Architecture became an equation of weight and recoil. The more balanced the hull, the more stable the firing. The result was the 74-gun ship, the symbol of the gunpowder era. With about 900 crew and a broadside weight between 700 and 900 pounds, the 74 was the balance point between power and maneuverability. 3 decks of artillery, 32-pounders below, 18 to 24 in the middle, 9 to 12 above, formed a calibrated pyramid of fire designed to last hours of combat. Training this machine required almost industrial discipline. The crew's routine was repetitive, precise, timed. Sponge, load, push, aim, fire, repeat. A well-trained ship could maintain 1 shot per gun every 90 seconds, something unthinkable a century before. From this model, the ship ceased to be a sum of sailors and became an integrated system of command, energy, and repetition. Artillery was no longer support, it was the ship's very identity. Each broadside represented not just force, but coordination, the visible expression of a new era in which war, even under wind and salt, began to obey the logic of the machine. No line of battle survived on courage alone. Behind every perfect broadside was a meticulous logistical system, as vital as the cannons themselves. Gunpowder, iron, and wood formed a global supply chain that fed the heart of the fleets. The first link was oak, A 74-gun ship required the felling of up to 4,000 trees, naturally curved trunks to fit the hull's curves. From forest to shipyard, the process could take years. Then came the iron. Cannons, nails, chains, fittings. Until the mid-17th century, bronze was the preferred material, expensive but resistant. The cast iron industrial revolution, however, cheapened and standardized the pieces, allowing larger fleets and equivalent armaments. In the magazines, every grain of gunpowder was treated like gold. Moisture could ruin an entire campaign, so the routine included constant ventilation and daily inspections. Granulated powder, with coarser grains and controlled combustion, replaced the old fine mix, reducing failures and explosions. Each cannon had 60 to 100 shots stored on board. The crew executed the loading cycle in 5 to 8 steps, always at the same rhythm. Training was not just military, it was almost liturgical. Dry the powder, clean the barrel, check the match or flintlock. Any inattention could turn the deck into hell. Behind the smoke of battles, victory was decided by who could maintain the flow of gunpowder and iron for hours without interruption. The commander who mastered this logistics did not command just a ship. He commanded a floating factory where every second counted and every mistake cost a life. October 1339. The gray sea of the English Channel dawns dotted with Spanish sails. It is the fleet that departed from Dunkirk, bound for Flanders, the last great galleons of the Hispanic monarchy, heavy, tall, and still faithful to grappling combat. On the horizon emerges the Dutch squadron of Martin Tromp, bringing something new, order and disciplined artillery. The encounter in the Downs roadstead would be the harbinger of the end of an era. The Spaniards form a compact mass, trusting in the thickness of their hulls and the courage of their crews. Tromp, instead of attacking head-on, positions his line parallel to the wind, opening fire at about 500 meters, precise distance to target masts and yards without risking his own broadside. Each broadside slices through the enemy rigging, and the galleons become immobilized prey, victims of mathematics. For 2 days, Dutch artillery dismantles the Spanish fleet piece by piece. The crossfire, executed with almost industrial cadence, destroys the concept of invulnerability of tall, slow ships. The Iberian armor of faith and bravery cannot withstand the regularity of steel and gunpowder. Chronicles report that Tromp himself sailed calmly along the line, inspecting the firing rhythm and signaling correction flags, a perfect choreography. When the smoke clears, almost all the galleons are in flames or surrendered. The Battle of the Downs consecrates a new paradigm. The sea no longer belongs to the thick-hulled giant, but to the fleet that thinks in line. From then on, maritime supremacy would pass from empires of faith to empires of calculation. The invincible fell, not by force, but by the discipline that turned the ocean into a laboratory. Between one cannon and another, the 17th century was also made of books, treatises, and theories. The line of battle was not born just on the waves. It was born on the drafting tables of men who thought of the sea as a system. This interlude opens the pages of that transformation. In 1697, the French Jesuit priest Paul Host publishes L'Art des Armes Navales, the first attempt to describe naval warfare as science. He defines formations, angles, and command signals with an engineer's precision. For Host, the ocean was a geometric chessboard, and ships moving pieces obeying mathematical laws. His book would become required reading for Louis XIV's French Navy and the basis for all subsequent doctrines. 50 years later, the Englishman Charles Deane translates these ideas into British practice, standardizing flag signals, rotations, and firing sequences. Thus, each navy begins to speak its own language, a kind of visual code that replaces the shout with calculation. The Swedish historian Jan Gleit would later call this process the industrialization of maritime warfare. Entire fleets built in series with identical ships, identical calibers, and replicable discipline. Doctrine became social technology. These sources, Host, Dean, Gleit, Roger, and Parker, are the navigation charts of this history. They show that the line of battle is not just a maneuver, but an intellectual product of the military revolution, where mathematics, logistics, and obedience created a new form of power. When the flags rise and the sails unfurl, we see not just ships, we see the materialization of thought, the moment when the sea learned to speak the language of science. At the end of the 18th century, after more than a century of line-of-battle dominance, a new sound echoes through the British shipyards, the short, dry bang of the carronade. Created in Scotland around 1778, this compact piece, with a short barrel and immense caliber, often 68 pounds, promised to return to naval combat the ferocity of close encounter. It was an attempt to break the orthodoxy of distance and cadence. The carronade had limited range, less than 400 meters, but its impact was devastating. In short shots, it exploded hulls and pulverized masts with brute energy. Mounted on light, easy recoil carriages, it could be operated by fewer men and thus fit even on small decks. On Nelson's HMS Victory, for example, the upper deck carronades ensured a final mouth the fire at short range, the last word before the grapple. For a moment, it seemed the sea would return to the era of hand-to-hand clashes. Smaller ships, armed with these dragons' mouths, tried to surprise larger adversaries at close range. But the fashion was short-lived. The line of battle, with its coordinated firepower, remained invincible in open field. The carronade was perfect for boardings or coastal defense, but ineffective in long lines under unstable winds. The Spaniards form a compact mass, trusting in the thickness of their hulls and the courage of their crews. Tromp, instead of attacking head-on, positions his line parallel to the wind, opening fire at about 500 meters, precise distance to target masts and yards without risking his own broadside. Each broadside slices through the enemy rigging, and the galleons become immobilized prey, victims of mathematics. For 2 days, Dutch artillery dismantles the Spanish fleet piece by piece. The crossfire, executed with almost industrial cadence, destroys the concept of invulnerability of tall, slow ships. The Iberian armor of faith and bravery cannot withstand the regularity of steel and gunpowder. Chronicles report that Tromp himself sailed calmly along the line, inspecting the firing rhythm and signaling correction flags, a perfect choreography. When the smoke clears, almost all the galleons are in flames or surrendered. The Battle of the Downs consecrates a new paradigm. The sea no longer belongs to the thick-hulled giant, but to the fleet that thinks in line. From then on, maritime supremacy would pass from empires of faith to empires of calculation. The invincible fell, not by force, but by the discipline that turned the ocean into a laboratory. Between one cannon and another, the 17th century was also made of books, treatises, and theories. The line of battle was not born just on the waves. It was born on the drafting tables of men who thought of the sea as a system. This interlude opens the pages of that transformation. In 1697, the French Jesuit priest Paul Host publishes L'Art des Armes Navales, the first attempt to describe naval warfare as science. He defines formations, angles, and command signals with an engineer's precision. For Hoste, the ocean was a geometric chessboard, and ships moving pieces obeying mathematical laws. His book would become required reading for Louis XIV's French Navy and the basis for all subsequent doctrines. 50 years later, the Englishman Charles Deane translates these ideas into British practice, standardizing flag signals, rotations, and firing sequences. Thus, each navy begins to speak its own language, a kind of visual code that replaces the shout with calculation. The Swedish historian Jan Gleit would later call this process the industrialization of maritime warfare. Entire fleets built in series with identical ships, identical calibers, and replicable discipline. Doctrine became social technology. These sources, Hoste, Deane, Gleit, Roger, and Parker, are the navigation charts of this history. They show that the line of battle is not just a maneuver, but an intellectual product of the military revolution, where mathematics, logistics, and obedience created a new form of power. When the flags rise and the sails unfurl, we see not just ships, we see the materialization of thought, the moment when the sea learned to speak the language of science. At the end of the 18th century, after more than a century of line-of-battle dominance, a new sound echoes through the British shipyards, the short, dry bang of the carronade. Created in Scotland around 1778, this compact piece, with a short barrel and immense caliber, often 68 pounds, promised to return to naval combat the ferocity of close encounter. It was an attempt to break the orthodoxy of distance and cadence. The carronade had limited range, less than 400 meters, but its impact was devastating. In short shots, it exploded hulls and pulverized masts with brute energy. Mounted on light, easy recoil carriages, it could be operated by fewer men and thus fit even on small decks. On Nelson's HMS Victory, for example, the upper deck carronades ensured a final mouth of fire at short range, the last word before the grapple. For a moment, it seemed the sea would return to the era of hand-to-hand clashes. Smaller ships, armed with these dragons' mouths, tried to surprise larger adversaries at close range. But the fashion was short-lived. The line of battle, with its coordinated firepower, remained invincible in open field. The carronade was perfect for boardings or coastal defense, but ineffective in long lines under unstable winds.
The victory lies not just in the number of wrecks, but in the consecration of the doctrine. The line is no longer a tactic, it is the universal grammar of naval warfare. Barfleur and Hogue end the debate begun a century before. From the North Sea to the Mediterranean, no navy would dare fight out of formation. From then on, the ocean has a new mother tongue, and it is written in rows of cannons, commanded by wind, flags, and mathematics. The line of battle was not just an arrangement of ships, but an idea that shaped European military thought. Over time, historians from different centuries have tried to understand why this system, so rigid and apparently limited, dominated the sea for more than 200 years. The Briton Geoffrey Parker, in The Military Revolution, argues that the standardization of naval artillery and line command were the maritime extension of the land revolution, the same impulse that turned medieval armies into coordinated machines. For him, the sea was the invisible laboratory where military modernity was born. N.A.N. Roger, in The Command of the Ocean, goes beyond technique. He shows that the secret of the Royal Navy lay in constant training. Crews practiced firing, maintenance, and maneuvers twice a week, even in peacetime. This routine made the British Navy not only the most powerful, but the most predictable, and therefore the most reliable. The Swede Jan Gleit describes this evolution as maritime industrialization.
The power of nations came to depend on production systems, shipyards, arsenals, and bureaucracies capable of sustaining identical fleets. Heroism gave way to administration. On the French side, Paul Hoste and Tourville are remembered as the founders of line theory. For them, obedience and cohesion were virtues as important as gunpowder. War, says Hoste, must be beautiful in form and terrible in effect. This convergence of voices reveals the essential. The line of battle was the first manifestation of a systemic mentality, where science, logistics, and discipline replaced chance. The sea, at last, became a mirror of reason. In a silent display case at the Istanbul arsenal rests an Ottoman bronze bombard, cast in the 15th century. The piece is colossal, engraved with Arabic inscriptions and stylized dragons. It represents the brute force of gunpowder in its primitive state, fire without discipline, pure thunder. A few thousand kilometers away, in Portsmouth, the carronade from HMS Victory shows the opposite. A compact, precise instrument, shaped by science. Between these two pieces, there is more than centuries. There is the birth of the modern logic of war. From the first disordered shot to the calculated fire of Trafalgar, the sea learned to speak in lines. Each ship of the line was a phrase in that grammar, made of oak, iron, and men who measured time in seconds of reloading. The line of battle was, for 2 centuries, the backbone of empires. It did not just win wars, it organized chaos. But every language ages. Steam, steel, and the telegraph, the new forces of the 19th century, would dissolve the order of sails and signals. When the first ironclads emerge, the line of battle disappears like a constellation fading at sunrise. Still, its logic survives. Steam fleets will continue to fight in formation under the same principle, coordinating fire and movement. The bombard and the carronade are thus the alpha and omega of the gunpowder era at sea. Between them stretches the story of how discipline defeated chance and how the human mind, through mathematics and cadence, taught the ocean to obey. Next episode, From Iron to Wire, how steam and the telegraph rewrote command at sea.